The wind screamed across the Arctic tundra, a merciless force that tore at the furs draped over Cale's trembling shoulders. A million years ago, the frozen north was a brutal expanse of ice and snow, where survival was a daily wager against starvation, cold, and the predators that stalked the endless wide. Cale, barely 20 winters old, crouched beside a faltering fire, its feeble flames sputtering against the frostbitten air. The shallow cave, carved into the edge of a towering glacier, offered scant protection for his clan, a ragged band of early humans, their faces hollowed by hunger, their eyes dulled by the weight of ceaseless struggle. The last scraps of mammoth meat lay in a pitiful pile, barely enough for one, let alone a dozen souls huddled in the dim light. Cale's mother, her breath shallow and ragged, pressed a chipped flint knife into his hand. Her fingers, gnarled and cold as the ice itself, lingered on his for a moment. "Hunt," she whispered, her voice brittle as the frost that coated the cave walls. Her eyes, sunken but fierce, held his, conveying a truth they both understood. The clan's survival rested on him, the youngest but strongest among them. Cale tightened his grip on the knife, its rough edges biting into his callous palm. The weight of his mother's trust anchored him, but fear churned in his gut. He was no stranger to the Arctic's cruelty. He'd seen others vanish into the snow of friends, kin, swallowed by blizzards or claimed by the jaws of beasts that roam the ice. The tundra spared no one, and hunger was a patient killer, waiting for weakness to take hold. The fire, their only defense against the cold, flickered dangerously low, its embers barely clinging to life. Without food to sustain them, the clan would perish before the next moon. Cale glanced at the faces around him. His sister, Lyra, barely 10, clutching a tattered hide to her chest, told to Urin, whose coughs rattled like stones in his lungs, and the others, their bodies frail but their spirits unbroken. They looked to him, not with hope, but with a grim expectation. He was their hunter, their provider, and there was no room for failure. He rose, wrapping his feet in strips of mammoth hide, the leather stiff and cracked from use. His furs, patched together from the pelts of past kills, smelled of smoke and blood, a reminder of the endless cycle of survival. The cave's mouth yawned before him, revealing a world blurred by swirling snow. Stepping into the storm was like plunging into a frozen sea, the wind slicing through his layers as if they were nothing. The Arctic was a living entity, vast and unforgiving, its beauty as deadly as its wrath. Cale squinted against the whiteout, his breath forming clouds that froze instantly on his beard. Somewhere out there was Prairie caribou, musk ox, or, if luck turned against him, nothing but snow and death. He adjusted the sling of his spear across his back, its wooden shaft worn smooth by his hands, and tucked the flint knife into his belt. The tools were crude, but they were all he had, honed through generations of trial and error. The snow crunched under his steps, each one sinking deep into the drifts. The cold seeped into his bones, a dull ache that never fully left, even in the rare moments of warmth by the fire. He moved with purpose, scanning the ground for signs of life. Tracks were fleeting in the Arctic, erased by wind as quickly as they appeared. His eyes, trained by years of necessity, caught faint indentations in the snow. A herd of caribou, perhaps, or a lone straggler separated from its kin. The tracks were fresh, no more than an hour old, but already the storm was filling them with powdery snow. Cale's heart quickened. A caribou could feed the clan for days, its hide and bones offering warmth and tools. But the hunt was never certain. The Arctic was a land of shadows and illusions, where hope could lead to ruin as easily as to salvation. He followed the tracks, his breath labored as the wind pushed against him, a giant's hand trying to force him back. The tundra stretched endlessly, broken only by jagged outcrops of ice and the occasional skeletal tree, stripped bare by the elements. Cale's thoughts drifted to his father, lost 2 winters ago to a hunt gone wrong. The memory was sharp, the man's strong frame disappearing into a blizzard, his spear found later, half buried in snow beside the mauled remains of a musk ox. Cale had been too young to join him then, but the lesson was clear: hesitation meant death. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the tracks. They veered toward a shallow valley, where the wind was less fierce, and the snow lay thinner. His fingers, numb despite the furs wrapped around them, flexed to keep the blood moving. The cold was a thief, stealing strength and clarity, and Kale knew he had only hours before his body would begin to betray him. The tracks grew clearer, the caribou's hoof prints distinct in the softer snow of the valley. Kale slowed, his senses sharpening. The herd was close, yet he could feel it. A prickle at the back of his neck honed by countless hunts. He crouched low, moving with the stealth of a predator, his body blending into the white landscape. The wind carried a faint musky scent, confirmation that his quarry was near. He crept forward, his spear now in hand, its flint tip glinting faintly in the dim light. The valley opened into a small clearing, and there it was, a lone caribou, its head bowed as it pawed at the snow for frozen lichen. It was young, its antlers small but sharp, its body lean from the harsh season. Kale's mouth watered at the sight, but he forced himself to stay still, calculating. A lone caribou was both a blessing and a risk. Without the herd, it was vulnerable, but it was also desperate, and desperation made any creature dangerous. He circled downwind, his movements silent despite the snow. The caribou's ears twitched, but it didn't bolt. Kale's heart pounded, a drum beat in his chest. He was close now, close enough to see the steam rising from the animal's flanks. His spear felt heavy, its balance familiar but never comforting. A single misstep, a moment's hesitation, and the caribou would flee, or worse, turn and fight. He'd seen hunters gored by antlers, their bodies left broken in the snow. Kale tightened his grip, his muscles coiling. He had one chance. The caribou lifted its head, its dark eyes scanning the horizon. Kale lunged, his spear arcing through the air. The flint tip struck true, piercing the animal's side, but the caribou was faster than he'd expected. It bucked, its antler catching his arm, tearing through fur and flesh. Pain flared, hot and sharp, but Kale didn't falter. He yanked the flint knife from his belt and drove it into the caribou's neck, twisting until the beast collapsed, its legs kicking weakly in the snow. Blood stained the white ground, warm and steaming, as Kale dropped to his knees, gasping. His arm throbbed, the wound deep but not fatal. He pressed snow against it, the cold numbing the pain but doing little to stop the bleeding. The caribou lay still, its eyes glazing over, a sacrifice to the clan's survival. Kale allowed himself a moment to breathe, his chest heaving as the adrenaline ebbed. The hunt was only half the battle. Dragging the carcass back to the cave would take every ounce of his strength, and the storm was growing fiercer, the wind now a deafening roar. He bound the caribou's legs with strips of hide, securing it for the journey. The weight was immense, nearly twice his own, but he had no choice. The clan needed this meat, this hide, this victory. He began the trek back, the caribou slung across his shoulders, its bulk pressing him into the snow with every step. The wound in his arm pulsed, blood soaking into his furs, but he ignored it. The cave was miles away, and the storm showed no mercy. Snow stung his face, blinding him, and the cold sank deeper, threatening to lock his joints. He thought of Lyra, her small hands clutching the hide, her trust in him unspoken but absolute. He thought of his mother, her whispered command echoing in his mind. He thought of the fire, its warmth a distant memory. Each step was a battle, each breath a defiance of the Arctic's will. The tracks he'd followed were gone now, erased by the blizzard, but Kale knew the way by instinct, by the shape of the glacier's edge and the faint landmarks etched into his memory. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes as so time blurred in the whiteout. His legs burned, his vision swam, but he kept moving, driven by a stubborn refusal to fail. The cave's outline emerged through the snow, a dark slash against the ice. Kale stumbled forward, the caribou's weight nearly breaking him. He reached the entrance, collapsing to his knees as the clan rushed to him, their voices a mix of relief and awe. His mother's eyes met his, her frail hand touching his face. "You did it," she murmured, and for the first time in days, the clan's faces held something like hope. The fire would burn tonight, and they would eat. But as Kale caught his breath, a low growl echoed from the starmouth, a reminder that in the Arctic, survival was never a promise, only a fleeting reprieve.